History of the Prophet Joseph by his mother Lucy Smith, as revised by George A. Smith and Elias Smith. Introduction. The history of the prophet Joseph Smith, originally entitled The History of Mother Smith by Herself, was written at the dictation of Lucy Smith, mother of the prophet, by Mrs. Martha Jane Knowlton Corray, who acted as her amanuensis. It was taken from the words of Mother Smith and dictated from memory mostly, but she also made use of such historical memoranda of the events related as were within her reach. Of the original manuscript, one copy was taken which was left with Lucy Smith, while the original was retained by the writer. This original Mrs. Corray held in her possession until her arrival in Utah, when she subsequently deposited a copy of it with President Brigham Young. Lucy Smith died near Nauvoo, May 5, 1855, but years prior to this date, some of her effects were left in the hands of her son, William Smith, among them being the manuscript copy of this history. From William, who was the last surviving brother of the prophet, and whose death occurred at Osterdock, Clayton County, Iowa, November 13, 1893, the document fell, surreptitiously it is declared by George A. Smith, into the hands of Isaac Sheen, who was at one time a member of the church in Michigan. When in September 1852 Apostle Orson Pratt went on a mission to England, he called on Mr. Sheen on his way east, and being shown the manuscript copy, he purchased it for a certain sum of money, took it to Liverpool with him, where, without revision and without the consent or knowledge of President Young or any of the 12, it was published under his direction in 1853. It was afterwards discovered that the book contained errors occasioned by its not being carefully compared with historical data. Some of the statements in the preface written by Elder Pratt were also in error. One especially, that the book was mostly written in the lifetime of the prophet, and that he had read it with approval, was incorrect, since it was written in 1845, the year following his martyrdom. For these reasons and others, mostly of a financial character, it was disapproved by President Young on August 23, 1865, and the edition was suppressed or destroyed. While some statements contained in the work were considered somewhat overdrawn, a circumstance easily accounted for when we remember the age of Mother Smith, the losses she had sustained in the death of a husband and 4 sons, and the consequent lapses of her memory, its many merits were fully recognized by the authorities, many of whom were greatly disappointed at the necessity of issuing the order to temporarily suppress its further circulation. Subsequently, a committee of revision was appointed by President Young, consisting of President George A. Smith and Judge Elias Smith, cousins of the prophet, men personally familiar with the family and thoroughly conversant with church history. They were instructed carefully to revise and correct the original work throughout, which they did, reporting their labors to President Brigham Young to his entire satisfaction. The revised and only authentic copy thus prepared and reported upon was retained by President George A. Smith, and shortly after his death, September 1, 1875, it was committed into my keeping, where it has remained until now. Recently, the question of printing the work as a serial in the Improvement era came up for consideration, and there was a unanimous sentiment among the members of the General Board of YMMIA favorable to its publication. The subject was accordingly submitted and explained to President Lorenzo Snow, who gave his sanction and his hearty approval of the enterprise. By the presentation of this work to the public, a worthy record is preserved, and the testimony of a noble and faithful woman, a mother indeed, a heroine in Israel, is perpetuated. The book, besides giving an extended account of the progenitors of the prophet and the Smith and Mack families, contains much interesting and valuable information found in no other publication relating to the life of the prophet Joseph Smith, who, through the will of God, was the chosen instrument to perform the foundation labor for the marvelous work and a wonder which God has established as His church in the last days. Believing that both old and young will be pleased as well as benefited by the perusal of its pages, and praying that it may inspire them with renewed zeal, and create in them additional faith in the great work of the Lord, I commend to the reader this history of the prophet Joseph. Joseph F. Smith, Salt Lake City, October 8, 1901.